Good morning or afternoon or evening or middle of the night or whatever time it is for you right now. My name is Leah Eustace, and I am talking to you from the Great White North up here in Ottawa, Canada. I am a consultant, and I work on almost on my own. I've got a current partner, Laura Ammerman, and we focus on copywriting. When I was growing up, I dreamed of being a writer. I loved to read. I would write journals. I draw lots of creative things. And like so many kids, I kind of went off in a different direction and worked as a grant maker and a program officer. I've been in the nonprofit sector for about 30 years. And the last 15 years, I've focused in on writing. And so I'm sort of taking myself back to my big dream as a kid, which is pretty amazing. Maybe call it a midlife crisis, but I'm not looking back. It's been fantastic. And I'm really fascinated both by the art and the science of copywriting. So by art, I mean the actual creative process of putting the words on paper, the art of the interview. By the science, I mean the tips and tricks that help that copy come across and really resonate with the donors. So I have a certificate in philanthropic psychology. I read everything I can on neuromarketing and behavioral science. And I like to put that all together into copy that so far has raised millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. So I've been very fortunate. I do a lot of cases for support, but I also do all sorts of other writing. So what I'm going to go through over the next 30 minutes or so are my top 19 tips for copywriting. A few of them are pretty connected, but worth emphasizing. And then at the end, I'm going to follow up with some next steps you could take. Do note down at the bottom of not all, but some of my slides, there's a link, a bit.ly link, and this will take you to my copywriting checklist. You can also sign up for my email, and I send that out very infrequently, but you can get that copywriting checklist. I still keep it up in front of me on my bulletin board, so I can refer to it all the time and ensure that I'm remembering my own tips and tricks, because it can be hard to remember the science of it when you're so deep into the creative side. All right, so let's get going. All right, tip number 1. We give from our hearts, not our heads. This has been proven and shown through research time and time again. The impulse to give comes from here. It does not come from our brains. It's not a logical thought process. It's an emotional trigger that happens and makes us feel very connected to that cause. And that's really important to remember, especially as fundraisers. When we're caught up in the day-to-day of our jobs, we're pretty focused in on metrics and stats and meeting goals, and we're stuck in our heads most of the time. So it can be difficult in your writing, internal to your organization, to step back and remember the heart side and kind of take that 50,000-foot view. One of the ways, or a few of the ways you can do that, is by focusing in on the why of the work you do and the who, not the how or what. Why and who tend to be more kind of heartfelt and heart-based questions, whereas the how and what are very logical. So you need to focus on inspiring that donor. How do you inspire them? You tell them about the future you believe in. You tell them about your hopes and dreams. You show them what you've been able to accomplish and the amazing things you'll be able to do over the next 5, 10, 25 years. That's the way you start to connect. And of course, also through the use of story, which we'll get to. Another really important tip, and this came to me a little later in life, and in part, it was instinctual. In part, I had that certificate in philanthropic psychology I just finished kind of gave me the science backup for my gut instinct. And I'm going to tell you why it's so important. It's so important because It's been shown, and through research done by Dr. Jen Shang, who has a doctorate in philanthropic psychology, that the more deeply we connect to our audience's core identities, group identities, geographic identities, the more likely they are to give, and the more importantly, the more loyal they'll be. So think about who the audience is for the copy that you're writing. It's not going to be a static audience. It very much depends on how the piece is going out and who it's going to. So think about, what do they like? What do they dislike? What do they identify with? Is there a strong community pride in your community? Is here in Canada, there's a great deal of Canadian pride. So I would touch on that for any national organization. Think about what keeps them up at night and what lights them up, what gets them really excited, and start to build a persona of your particular audience, and then write to that person. You're not writing for yourself, you're writing for your audience. And in most cases, when it comes to fundraising, that persona, that audience member doesn't look anything like us. They're older, they are different demographic, different generation. Here's just an example of something that I wrote recently where I really focused in on those identities and those kind of connectors. So essentially, you want to be writing in such a way that the reader is constantly saying, hey, that's me. That sounds just like me. Hey, me too. They're going to feel very connected. So if you have a look at this, you're a kind and caring supporter. I am kind and caring, or at least I hope to be, I aspire to be, and that's just as powerful. I'm kind and caring. Kind, caring, and compassionate are three words that whenever possible you should integrate into your copy. Again, Dr. Shang has tested this, and just inserting those couple of words can increase response. Then we go down to the second line. Like me, you've likely felt you've been on a COVID-19 roller coaster. Yeah, all of us have. This was written about a month into the pandemic. So yes, yeah, boy, you sound like you're going through the same thing I am. And I'm kind of feeling anger and sadness, anxiety, and fear. Certainly we were in the first month. And you want your audience, you want to acknowledge that. And the audience is saying, yeah, you know what? I feel that way too. But we also understand we're all in it together. And we desperately want to do something to help other people. So, yep, that sounds like me too. This particular appeal that went out beat projections by, last time I saw it was like 80%. So it's done really well. And I think it's just this, simple language. It's really connecting to where people are at that, or were at that point in time. And it touches the emotions, doesn't it? Not the heads. There's no facts and figures in here. This was for a hospital foundation, by the way. Tip number 3, it's not about you. Donors do not give to you, your organization. They give through you. You see the difference? They're not giving to you, they're giving through you to fix a problem they worry about, to sustain a solution they believe in, and feel like they've made a difference in the world. So the other way I look at this is we have our donors or our audience on one side, we have the cause here, and our institutions are the tiny little plus sign in the middle. We're just the connector. We're not the focus. Here's another example of what that might look like in copy. This is a gratitude report that I recently put together for a client in the US who does work, a lot of work in Africa. And I've been really upfront about what I just told you. So here at the name of the organization, we recognize that you're not giving to us. Instead, you're giving through us to make a difference in the lives of vulnerable people the world over. And you can continue. And then to the right, it says, we're simply the trusted temporary custodians of the change you want to see in the world, a change from hopelessness to hope and from despair to joy. It's pretty powerful stuff. And how much nicer is narrative like that than putting together a formal trust statement or transparency statement? This really deeply connects to the donor and recognizes to them that you understand your place, that you are that connector to them. Tip number 4, you know I was headed here, tell stories. That is almost the theme of my whole presentation, and I'm going to come at it at various ways. But the organizations that are best at fundraising are the ones who tell the best stories, hands down. And note, it says best stories. It doesn't say just stories. They have to be well-told stories. A poorly told story is not going to do you any good. But those that are fundraising and raising the most money right now are telling the best stories. And why does that work? Well, humans rely on stories to understand our world. We make sense of our lives through story. We plan our futures through story. Stories are remembered and shared. They better hold our attention. They bring our causes to life in a very deep way, and they lead to powerful fundraising. And in fact, once you start adding facts or stats, it actually depresses response because it forces people to start thinking and not feel. I call those kind of speed bumps along the way to absorbing a good story. So get away from your facts and stats and your lists of accomplishments, bullet point lists. It does not resonate with donors. And I'm talking about individual donors primarily. So, usually in corporate relationships or foundation relationships, you do need to provide those facts and figures. So I am generalizing a bit. Focus on the story of one. What do I mean by that? Focus on telling the story of one person only. Let me give you a little background to this. This is something I can talk about for a week, this particular tip, so bear with me. Think back to the war civil war in Syria, or think back. I mean, it's still going on. What you might not realize is that it actually began in 2011, so almost 10 years ago now. Severe human rights violations right from the start, massacres, major refugee crisis, yet it was barely mentioned in the news. And from a fundraising point of view, at the time, I was consulting with the UN Refugee Agency, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, who were very aware this was going on, very concerned, desperate to help. They were seeing people being displaced and refugees. And we went out with the message that this was something really important was going on the other side of the world. And we had no luck. The response was terrible. It was just horrible. And people didn't even know where Syria was, let alone what was going on there. They didn't know any Syrians. So there was just a real disconnect. And we kind of started to ease off on it and focus on things that did help raise money for the organization. But then what happened? 4 years later, this is 4 years after the crisis began. Again, you may be surprised to hear that. Alan Kurdi. This is an image. I tried to pick one that wasn't too disturbing, but a lot of disturbing images came through. It's hard to look at this without actually choking up still, all these years later. This picture went on the front page of every newspaper and every news channel around the world, every homepage of every news site. At first, they used black lines and kind of blacked it out, and then it opened up a bit. And suddenly, the world started paying attention. 4 years after this crisis began, money was raised. Certainly here in Canada, we have seen a huge number of Syrian refugees welcomed into the country warmly. And family groups and community groups are getting together and sponsoring families. It's been just amazing to see. But it was 4 years later. Pretty much everything you need to know about how people respond from a fundraising point of view to the story of one can be found in this story of Alan Kurdi. It just completely changed things in terms of revenue generation, and also that compassion and the relatability of the problem that needed to be solved. Suddenly there was a little kid and a face and a name that kind of personified or helped paint the picture of that crisis. Tip number 6, loss over gain. We're more sensitive to loss than to gain. So to give you an example, People will give more money if someone has lost their house and everything in it to a fire, but less to someone who's been hungry all their life. Do you see the difference? It's a change of state, and we react to a change of state. So think about your cause and how you can portray that change of state in the people or the things you serve, because I recognize we probably have people from environmental groups and other kind of organizations that are not necessarily people-centered. So think of the ways that you can talk about that kind of loss over gain and that change of state in your copy. It works. Number 7, here's me being really open and authentic. That is me. This will age me, of course. Grade 7, I was about 13 years old. And hello, wide leg corduroy pants and roller skates and wearing all brown. Yeah. Anyway, there I am. So speaking of effectively communicating, it is shown again through research and testing that writing at about a grade 6 or 7 level generates the best response. And I call this writing without speed bumps. You want to write copy that helps the reader feel. And if you start throwing in big words or complicated concepts, again, it forces people to move from their heart to their head in reading your letter. So how many of you know someone in your organization who would say, hey, our donors are really highly educated. It would be a big mistake to talk down to them by writing at a low grade level. Well, guess what? It's not anything to do with education. It's about ease of comprehension. Low grade level copy is not talking down to educated readers or treating them like children at all. Think of it instead as a form of courtesy, like enunciating clearly when you talk. The most super educated PhD will appreciate and respond to copy that's easy to read. And in fact, MS Word can help you here. MS Word, if you can turn on the readability stats in it, just Google it, you'll find it, how to do it. You check your spelling and grammar and it pops up with some of those stats. There are also, you can use online the Hemingway app. Hemingway app is an amazing free tool where you can paste your copy and it'll give you all sorts of feedback about whether you're using passive language, about the grade level, whether you're using a word too much, that sort of thing. I use it all the time. So again, fundraising copy that's written at a higher than a grade 7 level will draw a lower response. It's been tested, it's reality. What does that look like exactly? That writing in a simple way, it means short sentences. You saw that in the example I showed you of that COVID appeal. Short sentences, lots of white space, short paragraphs. You're writing like you speak. You're ignoring the rules of grammar, to be honest. When we speak, we don't speak in a grammatically correct fashion. So all the retired English teachers in your database will not be happy and may write back and correct your grammar, but that's okay. It means they're paying attention. You want to make it as easy as possible to read. That's the primary focus here. Tip number 8, get out of your storytelling box. So think about other ways you could tell your story. Maybe your founding story, the story of your founder. And often those are amazing stories of a group of passionate people getting together to fix a problem. A donor's story, could you tell a donor's story from their voice in first person? A beneficiary story, of course, an impact story. Sometimes we forget to tell the stories of people who've benefited from our work. A vision story. So what does the future look like for you? And that's not necessarily your ED talking or your CEO. That may be a board member. It could be a founder. It could be someone who's retired. Inanimate object story, and I'll be sharing with you in a minute an appeal I wrote that's signed by a table. You surprising and delighting your donors is always a good move. And telling some of those difficult stories by way of using an inanimate object. I've told stories I had letters go out signed by telephones, signed by hospital stretchers, signed by dogs, signed by birds, and signed by tables more than once. Get creative. take advantage of the concept of social proof. So social proof is our tendency to look to the actions of others to guide our own actions. And that is true for giving decisions as well. I love this particular graphic because it illustrates it really well. You can see this is exactly the same ad, but the photo of the baby is slightly different. On the left, the baby is looking out toward the reader. On the right, the baby is looking up towards the copy. And look what happens with that heat map. So the red areas are where people's eyes pay the most attention and stay the longest. So on the left, great. If you want them to be completely paying attention to the baby and ignoring the message, this one works great. Look what happens on the right. When the baby looks toward the copy, we look toward the copy and we start to read it. I use this when I'm, visual storytelling is really important. When I'm doing a case for support, for example, you'll often see in the ones I've produced, you'll see the storyteller or the photo of the person looking at particular copy on the page. And that's because I want to guide the reader's attention to that bolded statement or that call to action. Here's another example of using social proof. It works really well in legacy giving or planned giving to have a donor, someone who's left a bequest in their will or a gift of life insurance as an intention to tell their own story of why they care and why they decided to make that decision. That decision. You would think I was not a copywriter. I can't speak. I write, okay? I don't speak stories. So ACLU, this was a legacy package that went out, I think, last year. And this beautiful human being, Judy, who is a donor, has left a gift in her estate. And she talks about, this is just part of the package that you're seeing. There was a video and there was emails. There was all sorts of stuff that went with it. But it was very powerful, did very well because it was a donor speaking to a donor. And it's hard to tell in this particular image because it's flat, but the brochure opens up, those faces split in the middle, and it opens up with Lady Liberty on one side and Judy on the other. It was an amazing piece. Any of these, if you want to follow up with me afterwards, I'm very happy to send you copies of, so you can look at the whole thing. Number 10, set your anchor. So typically when we think of an anchor, it's related to a number. So the concept is the first number, photo, or sentence we see guides our actions. And this has been, here's a neat little experiment that's been done that you could do yourself actually, is you get people to say out loud the last 2 digits of their social insurance number or social security number. So mine might be 12, the other person might be 99. Show them a bottle of wine and ask them how much they would pay for it. The person who said 12 might say, oh, maybe I'd pay $15 for that. The person who said 99 would be more like $50. That first figure has anchored their subsequent decision-making. So that's great in copy. It's even better on reply coupons. But there's so many ways you can use this. Think about all those anchor moments. So people are really looking to this anchor to make that decision, and they make multiple decisions on what to do as they're thinking about and moving towards a gift. Should I open the package? Should I agree to the meeting? Should I read the letter? Should I click on this link in the email? Think about all the anchors or anchor possibilities that you have, and be very, very thoughtful about your opening words, your opening image, because it can set the stage for the entire reaction the person has. Use a voice of authority. So we naturally feel a sense of duty or obligation to people in positions of authority. We want to follow the lead of real experts. Now, I'll put a little asterisk on this because this is partly generational. I'm a Gen X, and I am less likely to more likely to question authority than the generations before me. And I give you a specific example. My grandmother, who's been gone for 10 years now, was diagnosed with an aggressive cancer. at age 90, if you can believe it. And I went on that journey with her. I was with her for all her appointments. And so I really witnessed this firsthand. When a doctor would tell her something, she would take it as gospel and not question it. And I would come back and say, well, what about this or that? Have you considered that? Could we get a second opinion? So there's a generational difference, but again, we have to remember that often our fundraising audience is older than us. And think about other ways that you can voice authority. It could be what you're wearing. It could be your title. People express authority through the vehicle they drive. And giving that appearance, even just that appearance of authority, increases the likelihood that people will comply with requests, even if their authority is illegitimate. And I'll let you fill in the blanks on that one because I won't get into politics. When people are uncertain, they look outside themselves for information to guide their decisions. So use that when you can. Here's an example of how you might use that. This is the letter from the table. It was for an organization called House of Friendship here in Canada. And again, happy to share the entire letter and package, but it's a little quirky to send out a letter signed by a table. And the letter itself is a little quirky because of that. And so to balance that quirkiness, the package also included a letter from the very well-known executive director. He's known throughout town. People love him. And so he's added a note from John. And he talks about why he's sending a letter at that time of year, because it was unusual for this organization. But it also lends that authority to what's a fairly quirky and fun piece of mail. It adds that balance. Tip number 12, limit the scope of the problem. People do not scale up their efforts in proportion to a problem's true size. We tend to neglect the scope of the problem, in particular when we're dealing with social issues. And this is also called scope insensitivity. People don't scale up their effort in proportion to a problem's true size. For example, a donor willing to give $100 to help one person might only be willing to give $200 to help 100 people, instead of the proportional amount, which would be $10,000. Again, an example. This is an e-appeal that I put together a few months ago. I think it's pre-COVID, about midwives in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the huge problem they have with high infant mortality rates and a huge number of deaths of women in childbirth. The numbers are astounding and too big for our audience to wrap their head around. So did I talk about the 20,000 women needing your help? No, I talked about one particular midwife. Hélène needs the help. She needs the knowledge, or she needs to have available the knowledge and skills that help her save lives. So how many men and women are going into a risky labor this year, it really doesn't matter, because one has died while you read the email, just one. And guess what? You, dear reader, are the hero of this particular story. Much more powerful than if we went out with a bunch of stats and figures and a photo of a whole bunch of people. Tip 13, this is kind of related, but it's worth repeating. Avoid asking for a drop in the bucket. People are reluctant to help when they feel their impact's not going to be significant. So I tend to stay away in my copy, particularly when it comes to cases for support. I tend to stay away from putting the goal because 35 million, 100 million, 2 million, whatever the case may be, is a huge number. I prefer to put out a case that inspires the reader to take action and want more information. And then we can start talking about money. But it can be off-putting to talk about those big, huge numbers. Most people prefer to give to causes where they feel like they can save the greatest proportion of people or things. And that means that rather than save 100 out of 1,000 victims of malaria, the majority of people would rather use the same or even more resources to save, 5 out of 5 people stranded on a boat, or one girl stuck in a well. With this, they put the same amount of resources to that as they would for the greater numbers. It's called the drop in the bucket effect. And it seems really irrational when you say it out loud, but much of this is affecting us on a subconscious level. It's that subconscious that I find fascinating, and the role it plays in decision making. Number 14, use scarcity. So humans place a higher value on an object that's scarce and a lower value on one that's abundant. So I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like. There was a study done where they put out 2 different ads, and this is back in the day when you had newspaper help wanted ads. And one of the ads suggested there were numerous job vacancies, while the other suggested that very few were available. The study found that subjects who were presented with the advertisement that suggested limited possibilities or limited positions viewed the company as being a better one to work for than the one that applied many job positions were available. Subjects of the study also felt that the advertisement that suggested limited vacancies translated to higher wages. So in short, the test subjects placed a positive higher value on the company that suggested there were scarce job vacancies. Think about how you can use that, particularly when it comes to sponsorship and sponsorship proposals. Tip number 15, reciprocity works. If we are given something, we're likely to give back. So remind donors of what they've received from you. This works particularly well in healthcare right now. Reminding people of the heroes that are on the front lines and what they're still delivering babies. They're still diagnosing cancer cases. That can work really well. The other thing you see as an example of this is when you receive these packages with address labels and so on in the mail. People will respond positively to that. It's a bit of guilt. It's, I've received something, I should give something back. Think around the holidays, if one of your neighbors comes over with a present for you, how quickly you scramble to find something for them. That's a good example of reciprocity in action. Tip 16, donor versus donation. So this is a recent learning of mine. This came out of Dr. Shang's research and makes total sense to me. So your newer donors see themselves as having made a donation, whereas your loyal donors see themselves as donors. Do you see the difference there? So this would be, if you think about thank you letters, are you thanking people for being a loyal and generous donor when they've only made one gift? It's going to be off-putting. Thank them instead for their donation. I received a letter from a national charity not too long ago that talked about how loyal and generous I was. I'm a good person. And as far as I can recollect, I've only given them $25 once, and it was from a door-to-door campaign done by my neighbor. So it really struck me as odd and certainly didn't inspire me to give. Tip number 17, write as long as it takes. So despite what your board members think, and perhaps what you think, long letters almost always outperform short ones. And my definition of a short letter is both sides of one sheet of paper or less. My definition of long is more, it's probably 2 sheets plus of paper, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. But write as long as it takes to tell your story. This is so counterintuitive, this one, because, and we have to remember, we're not the audience. And even if you ask your donors, do you want short letters or long? They'll say short. But look at their behavior, not what they say. Those are 2 very different things. Tip number 18, repetition works. So think about how your story will be used and write accordingly, whether it's website, letter, newsletter, article. There's so many different ways to tell the same story. And just as you're getting sick of that story is about when donors are starting to hear it. I know of one organization here near where I live that has been sending out exactly the same appeal, the same story. All they change is the date. They've been sending out for, it's probably coming close to 20 years, every April to the same group of people, and it still does well because we know we're repeating the story. The donor gets this a package and says, oh, this sounds a little bit familiar. Maybe I heard this woman on the radio. Maybe a friend was telling me about her. It's that familiarity, and it prompts them to give. They don't remember they received that exact letter. Well, very few of them would remember that. Finally, tip number 19. Build, measure, learn. Copywriting is a process that is kind of never ending, and you constantly improve. I'm learning new things every day. I do things like make small donations to a lot of the bigger charities in both Canada and the US so that I get their appeals and get their newsletters, because I know they're testing left, right, and center. And what they're sending me is probably an example of what's working. Measure, testing, 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 so important. And continue to learn. So this is where I get to jump in with a little promo about myself. I am in the process of turning these 19 tips, and it may be more by the time I pin it down, into a 19-week long set of webinars on demand. 15 to 20 minutes each one tops. We're all sick of being on webinars, but I will be diving deeper into each of those 19 tips, giving lots of examples and offering support. So if you're interested in learning about that as I develop it, please check out my website. You can sign up for my newsletter. And again, I hardly ever send anything out, so you're not going to get bombarded. And it's not sales, it's valuable tips and tricks. Or sign up for that checklist. And in the meantime, I will look forward to your comments, your questions. I've got my phone number here. I'm an open book, so feel free to reach out. I would love to noodle through a problem with you. I would love to share some examples of copy, and I'd love to learn from you. Thank you so